On this episode of Living with a Classic, the #1 preventative maintenance you have to do to your Jaguar V12 to prevent a massive fire. Welcome back to Living with a Classic, and today we're in the workshop with the XJS and we'll be doing a really important piece of preventative maintenance. We'll be replacing all of the fuel hoses that go to fuel injectors and around the engine. These are often neglected on these cars and have caused numerous fires over the years, since they're right down in the middle of the engine bay, they're right next to the spark plugs and a bunch of other things that can spark. So they have a tendency to, get brittle with age, harden up, then they might crack or start weep. Then you might have some bad cables nearby, you get a spark, and boom, you have 30 plus psi of fuel spraying out in a thin mist and you have a massive fire. Plenty of these cars have been scrapped due to this, so this is something that you really should not ignore and you really need to be careful when you replace them. But don't worry, it's something you can easily do at home. I'll show you how it can be done with a kit, where you can buy it, and that it's really not that difficult. So now I'll show you the engine, show you the hoses, and I'll show you how to replace all of it. Here's that V12 engine. Here are all the injectors. There's 12 of them down here. These are the fuel lines that we're going to be replacing. Once they get hard, they can easily crack, and then you have the distributor right here and the spark plugs all over here. So maybe you have old cables and one of these starts leaking or cracking and you'll have a spark right here, and that will create a massive fire. And if you're unlucky, that will basically total your car. So if you smell any fuel at all underneath the hood, turn your engine off right away. If you see any wetness around any of the injectors, don't run your car until you replace them. And the same, if you feel that these are starting to get hard, you can still push these, but they're starting to get really hard, just replace them. It's a lot cheaper to replace them than to have to replace your car. Here is everything you'll need to service your injectors. Of course, you'll need a kit of parts. This is Seal Kit 131 from Mr.Injector in the UK. It's for an HE V12. They also have kits for the pre-HEs and for a lot of other cars. So you can just check it on their website. There'll be a link down below. And you can see if they have a kit for your car. They probably do. So here are the injector sealing rings up front. Here are the filters, the pinnacle caps, the big rubber grommets around the injectors, all new hoses, and then the rings that hold the hoses in place. So it's a complete kit to redo your injectors. And here are the tools you'll need to complete the job as well. Just some normal wrenches, a flathead screwdriver. I really like to use these swiveling end wrenches. They're really great when you want to get to the bolts holding the injectors in place. They're 7/16. A ratchet is good as well. You'll need a sharp knife. You'll need a hacksaw. You'll also need this screw, which I use to get the filters out, and I'll show you more of that later, and various different pliers. This one's great for getting hoses off, and this one's good to help to get those rings off. So now let's go to the car and start to remove the whole fuel rail. Now it's time to get the fuel rail out, and there's a lot of things in the way, so I will start by removing these pipes over here. I will also disconnect the throttle cable, disconnect the throttle linkage, and a few other vacuum parts around here. And then basically you can just loosen all these bolts that hold the injectors in place, and then disconnect the feed line and return line, and you can lift the whole fuel rail out with the injectors in place. So I'm going to do that right now. With all of that out of the way, it's time to disconnect the connector at each injector. Now the last thing to do before you can lift out the whole fuel rail with all the injectors is to disconnect the feed and the return fuel line. Make sure that you have depressurized the fuel system. Disconnect the power to the fuel pump, crank the engine over. Basically it will probably catch and start and stall right away when it runs out of fuel pressure. Still, you should have a rag ready because a little bit of fuel will probably dribble out. Okay, just a little bit dribbled out there. And a little bit dribbled out there. Now that everything is loose, with some gentle wiggling, you should be able to get the fuel rail out. Just be careful not to snag any cables. And that's the fuel rail removed. Finally, we have the whole fuel rail on the bench, and now we can start working on it. And now when it's on the bench, you can see why it's a good idea to replace all the injector seals as well. I'll get one of them off here. As you can see, it's starting to split already. Not really sure how old these are. They might be original to the car. Might have been replaced at some point. But it's a really good idea to replace them now. So I'm going to get some of the injectors off, and then I'll show you how you rebuild the injectors. Start by taking a sharp knife and cut the injector hose right at the middle. Set the injector to the side, but make sure to keep track of where it came from and the orientation. You see some of them are oriented in different ways. That's so they can connect back to the cables again. Now grab the hacksaw and carefully cut alongside the hose into the metal sealing ring so you can split it in half and get it off. Once you've carefully cut it all the way through, grab a flathead screwdriver to separate the ring a bit. And then you can remove it. Now grab a set of pliers and carefully remove the hose. The next step is to do the same thing with the injector. It also has a metal ring right there that you need to cut off with a hacksaw carefully. You need to hold on to the injector somehow. I found the best way to do this is in a bench vise. However, you don't want to clamp onto any part of the injector. I think the best way of doing this is to remove this ring and to clamp onto the old rubber ring beneath it. The easiest way to get this out is to grab a screwdriver and just put it in between this metal ring and that rubber grommet or sealing ring, and basically just try and get it out. Once you have it off, you can then remove the metal ring, put this back on, let it go all the way into that groove, and now you have a great way to hold on to the injector pretty tightly. So just center it in the vise and clamp down onto that piece of rubber. You'll be replacing that anyway. It doesn't have to be super tight, just as long as it doesn't go anywhere. Grab a hacksaw again and carefully cut into this metal ring as well and remove it the same way. It sometimes helps to take the blade out of the hacksaw or to have a spare blade in your hand when you're cutting the last part. You definitely don't want to cut into the injector, so sometimes you have a lot more control just with a loose blade. With the hose removed, grab a screw, basically any screw that's pretty long and that can thread into the old filter. Don't worry if you damage the filter, you're going to pull it out anyways. Screw the screw in a little bit and then grab some pliers. There's the old filter. Now you can take it out of your vise and remove the last bit that you're replacing, the pinnacle cap. Just take your sharp knife and cut along the cap. Once it's cut open, you can just bend it apart and there it comes off. Before you start reassembling the injectors with new pinnacle caps and filters, there's another tool that's recommended that you have, a quick grip clamp or another brand, as long as it has detachable pads. You get this extra rubber ring in the kit, some super glue, and a drill. So what you do is you remove the pads, you drill a small hole in the center of one of the pads. Like that. Then you grab some super glue and you glue that rubber ring around that hole. And then just let that sit. Basically then you let the pinnacle cap rest in there and you put the whole injector in the clamp and you press in the filter and the new pinnacle cap at the same time, and that hole prevents you from damaging the tip of the injector. Now you're ready to install the new parts on the injector. A new pinnacle cap and a new filter. So put them both in there. Grab the quick grip clamp that you prepared earlier. Put the cap in there. Make sure it's pretty well centered. And then you can just start clamping all together. Now the cap is in. And there's the filter also. So the new filter is in place. And the new cap as well. So now this is ready to go back on the fuel rail. When you put the injectors back, you need to think about orientation and to put the correct one back where you took it off. So do one at a time. So you can have a look at the other side. The connector should be pointed this way. So that one should be on there like that. So start by grabbing the metal ferrule, put it on the injector, grab your new hose, dip it in a little bit of new engine oil, just a little bit like that. Put it on the injector and put it on a flat surface. Basically push it all the way down. And you can tell that's all the way down because you'll be unable to pull the hose up. There we go. Now the next step is to do the same thing on the fuel rail. But don't forget to put this thing back. This is what will hold your injectors in place. If you forget to put that back, you can't really put them on afterwards. Put it on there. Dip the hose in a little bit of engine oil. Make sure it's oriented the right way. And firmly push it on all the way to the bottom. And now that's in place. The last thing to do is to just put on the new rubber ring. It's here. So first put on this metal ring over the injector. Put that rubber ring all around the side so it goes down into the groove. Push that up and put the injector seal over the pinnacle cap. And that's an injector rebuilt with a new hose, all the rubber parts replaced, a new pinnacle cap, and a new filter. Now you just have 11 more to go. And now, several hours later, all the injectors are back in place. All the hoses are new, the pinnacle caps, all the seals. It's all looking really good. It's ready to go back onto the car. And once you've bolted everything back and plugged everything back in, you're basically done. As you might have noticed, it's a pretty big project to do this, but it's really important, so take plenty of time to do it. If you haven't done it before, I'd budget about half an hour per injector and maybe an hour to get everything off and an hour to put everything back. So 8 hours if you haven't done this before, so you can definitely do this in a weekend. I would also recommend to replace all the fuel hoses around the fuel rail, so the incoming fuel hose, the outgoing, the ones around the fuel cooler. I will replace those as well, but the video is already kind of long, so I'll show that in another video. So if you like this video, please hit the like button, share it with your friends. If you're not already subscribed, I highly recommend that you do. I put out new videos every week on this XJS, on my other XJ12, and some various other cars. So until next time, I'm Adam, and this was Living with a Classic. I'll see you soon.